This is John Chattin-McNichols, and this is a video introducing the Montessori method. The video is copyrighted, so please don't copy it and share it. When we start talking about Montessori, there's so many subtopics, as you can see here: Montessori the person, Montessori's writings, organizations, teacher education, how do you get to become a Montessori teacher, and finally Montessori schools, which is where we'll start talking about the Montessori method. Here's some information on Montessori and her life, the biography, a short one. You can read much more about her. If you want to read a good book on her life, I recommend E.M. Standing's book, Montessori, Her Life and Work. Basically, two important things is that she became a physician, and that in 1907 she started her first Montessori school, which was a preschool serving children ages 3 to 7. Here are a bunch of Montessori's most important writings. I think these 4 are the most important: Montessori method, and then a rewrite of Montessori method called Discovery of the Child, book called The Secret of Childhood, and finally the one that I suggest people start with, which is The Absorbent Mind. She also wrote lots of smaller papers, and of course there have been many books written by other people about Montessori, including my book about Montessori. Here is a page from the old hardback edition of The Absorbent Mind that shows this wonderful chart that Montessori made up about language development between the birth of the child and age 2. In terms of organizations, the first Montessori organization, the one that Montessori herself founded, was the Association Montessori International in 1929, AMI. There's their website. They have national organizations in many countries, and certainly including the United States. Montessorians in the United States originally were members often of AMI, but a number of them broke with AMI and founded the American Montessori Society in 1960. And lastly, another American organization that is international in scope, just like the AMS, is MACTE, the Montessori Accreditation Council for Teacher Education. It was the result of 20 years of work to get federal recognition for this MACTE body to be the accreditor of Montessori teacher education programs. It's not limited to AMS or AMI, but there are standards that programs have to meet. Because this is one of the few organizations that accepts everyone who meets the standards, it's now used by a number of training programs outside of the United States, even though it's an American organization. So there are websites that you can check out there. When we talk about Montessori teacher education, we talk about Montessori setting up her first training programs. You have to realize that this is in the context of more than a century ago. And so her teacher education model was not nearly as radical as her model for children. It consisted primarily of lectures given by Montessori and sometimes other lecturers. And that covered, as it says here in the text, child development, educational philosophy, the materials, classroom observations were about the only thing that were not taught in the lecture part. And during the lecture, especially in the area of the Montessori materials and how to use those Montessori materials, students would take notes, and then those notes would be checked by the people running the course, Montessori or one of her helpers. And those were your textbooks then. Those were your Montessori albums that reminded you how to use all of these Montessori materials. In contrast with the way we prepare teachers nowadays, the thing that stands out is that there was no student teaching. Nowadays, at a university teacher preparation course, you would spend at least a third of a year, and in most cases a full year, working under a head teacher and being supervised by your teacher education program. That didn't happen in the early Montessori ones, and AMI still chooses not to have practice teaching. They do have observations. And that's one of the differences between those two organizations. It's important for you listening to this to understand that the word Montessori in the United States and de facto in other places as well, the word Montessori is a public domain word. In other words, it's not patented or copyrighted. And that means anyone can call their school a Montessori school. And it may not have trained Montessori teachers. It may not have Montessori materials. It may not have anything to do with Montessori. So there are fake Montessori schools, not many of them, but they exist. And the same is true with Montessori teacher preparation programs. The MACD minimum standard for the length of a Montessori training program is 320 hours of contact between the student and the training program. Usually that's done over a full calendar year. It also requires a full school year of student teaching. So when you see a Montessori course that says you're going to become a Montessori teacher in 2 weeks, you need to know that that's more likely an introduction to Montessori and not a full teacher preparation. Because all three of those organizations that you saw a few slides ago believe that Montessori teacher education takes a year and requires a minimum of 320 hours of instruction. Here's a picture of some Montessori teachers in elementary. These are 6 to 9 teachers, and they're taking a math class at Seton Montessori Institute in Chicago. Here's another picture from my students. This one is in Slovenia in Eastern Europe. Montessori schools work almost always with a 3-year age span. So unlike a traditional classroom, say a first grade classroom might have 6-year-olds, or a preschool classroom might have 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds. Montessori works with a 3-year age span. Of all the 3-year age spans that Montessori schools serve, by far the most common is the 3-year-old to 6-year-old group, an early childhood classroom. That's true not just in the United States, but pretty much worldwide. The next most common are the elementary ages, 6 to 9-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds, followed by infant and toddler classes, so children who are younger than 3. And the least common are middle schools and high schools. Not very many of either of those. One of the things about Montessori schools is the physical environment. So the idea that Montessori can only happen in a specialized environment. For example, in this picture again from Slovenia, first of all, you see a beautiful window, which is very nice, but not required. But what is required are the low open shelves that you can see here, full of materials for the child to choose from, and open areas on the floor and on tables where children can make use of these materials. It isn't a classroom with desks all oriented up toward the teacher, because the materials are what are important, rather than learning everything from the teacher. As it says in the text, they're the rooms divided into areas for the different content, and this is a 3 to 6 classroom there in Slovenia. So again, when you try to figure out how to say what Montessori is, and what does Montessori mean when you say the Montessori method or a Montessori school, it's hard to say that in a short period of time. There's so much that goes into that. And as I move out from the decades that I've had in Montessori, I'm making this video in the 51st year I've worked since I started in Montessori in 1968. And now I focus on Montessori's role as an observer. She didn't come to Montessori as a teacher or as a principal or as an educational administrator of some kind, or as someone who had a fixed idea of what schools should be. She came as a scientist and observed and saw how children were treated. And what she saw was that the environments of the child was in when she started, were preventing the children from reaching their full potential. And by environment, she meant both the physical environment and the social environment. The physical environment, for example, when she started her observations, there weren't furniture such as chairs and tables that were the right size for children. They always had to be in adult-sized chairs or just on the floor by themselves. There weren't outdoor activities. The whole idea of playgrounds and jungle gyms and climbing apparatus for children did not exist. So they had to improvise those things. So Montessori set about making an environment that was appropriate for children. And that's the environment that you see in a Montessori school. And then social environments, we skipped that. Let me go back to this one just a second. Social environments means the adults, and the adults were not understanding the potential of young children, and they were not allowing children to do the things that they needed to do to make the most efficient and quickest and best development of their intelligence, of their concentration ability, of their social ability, and so on. An example would be that a child would have a bad behavior, maybe slamming the door when they came into a room. And the parents would punish the child for that, but they would never teach them how to close the door quietly. So in both the physical environment and the human environment, Montessori has the role, both when she was alive and in Montessori schools, now that she's gone, their role is to remove obstacles to development. Okay, so now we're going to focus on the physical environment and look at 3 areas. And again, this is just an introduction, and so you're not going to get as much as you would get when you had a year-long training. And look at the materials, and then how materials are organized on shelves, and then the overall organization of a Montessori classroom. So here is an example of a Montessori material. Actually, it's a set of materials. It's a set of these colored number beads. So a 1 bead, a 2 bead, a 3 bead, on up to a 9 bead. And it's arranged in a nice organized shape, making a triangle there, an equilateral triangle. So what is special about Montessori materials and how are they different? Because lots of programs in early childhood and early elementary make use of some kind of materials. So Montessori materials, as it says in the text here, should be safe. They should be attractive. They should be things that children want to get their hands on, want to experience, want to see how this works. Developmentally appropriate. So that means that these are not too hard and not too difficult for the students, and also that they have enough interesting things that can be done with them to keep the child's attention. That's also part of developmentally appropriate as a criterion for Montessori materials. Remember that the age range we're talking about here is a 3-year age span. So if we're talking about early childhood, and these are an early childhood material, we're talking about children from 3 to 6. And we're not just talking about typically developing 3 to 6-year-olds. We're talking about children who may be behind others. So maybe they're operating at a 2-year-old level, or even a 1.5-year-old level, but they're 3 years old. Or maybe they're operating at a 7 or 8-year-old level, even though they're only 6 years old. So the range of developmental readiness in a Montessori 3 to 6-year-old classroom is very large. Montessori materials are not cheap to buy, and that's because they're not cheaply made. They're made out of high quality, durable materials, often wood, and if there's plastic, then it's well done. It shouldn't feel cheap or easily breakable. And then the one at the bottom is color, the use of color. In non-Montessori early childhood classrooms, you see huge amounts of brightly colored things on the walls, brightly colored materials. Here's an example for you to look at. Let's see if I can get this up. There it is. So that's certainly full of bright colors, but in Montessori environments, each number is color-coded. So you see that the 1 bead is a red bead. You can look here and you can see the numeral 1 on this is red, But when there's a ring around this, a ring put around this peg, it's blue. And then this one is blue for 2, but it has a red and an orange ring. So there's lots of color here, but the color is random. It's just splattered all over everything. That, in Montessori thinking, is a wasted opportunity. Color is important. Color stands out for children. And so you shouldn't just splash it over everything and, you know, not take advantage of it to help children learn things. Finally, there's a couple of 3 more ideas. One is control of error. And I don't have a picture of this material up, but I can describe it. It's a block of wood that has 10 different holes drilled in it, and then a core, so a cylinder that fits in each of those 10 holes. And so they go from about as thin as a pencil to maybe 2 inches in diameter approximately. And the task is simply to mix up all those cylinders and put the skinny one in the skinny hole, and the next one, the next one, and the next one, up until you get to the 10th one, which is the widest cylinder. If you imagine starting and putting a cylinder in that's too small. So suppose in the 3rd cylinder, you put in the third hole, you put in the 1st cylinder. That cylinder would rattle around in there, would be one thing that you would use to notice that you had done it wrong. But also, when you get to the end, you're not going to have all the cylinders filled up. In this matching of cylinders to exactly matching holes, you can't make one mistake, because then the one that would fit, that's got the loose one, is also not going to fit where it goes. That's called control of error. The idea, that's the important idea here that I want you to get, is that the information that you haven't got it right, that you still need to work on it, is coming directly from the material, not from a person. Montessori felt that no matter how sweetly or kindly or politely or empathetically you say to a child, it's wrong, or keep trying, you haven't gotten it yet, that that's different than the material saying to you, it doesn't fit, you need to try something else. The control of error from the materials is neutral. You still need to work on this some more. That you've got it wrong from an adult is never neutral. It's hard for the child to hear that. So the control of error allows the children to get the right answer on their own. And they feel very proud when they do that. Isolation of difficulty is the idea that Montessori uses a material for one primary purpose. You don't have a single math material that you're going to use for counting, for addition, for subtraction, for multiplication, and for division. Specialized materials make it very clear how to understand the thing that's being taught. And then finally, I mean, the disadvantage of that, of course, is that there's so many materials. You need shelf space, and the materials are expensive. And the teachers need to be trained in all these different materials. So, but if you have all of that, then you have a marvelous clarity and a marvelous easy sequence through mathematics. Lastly, indirect aims. So I mentioned, look at these beads again on this slide 16. These beads form an equilateral triangle. That's an indirect aim. Those beads and that shape can be used when you're talking about that kind of triangle, and you can go back to the child and say, remember when you saw this? Well, that made a shape. Guess what? That's an equilateral triangle too. Let me give you one more example. So I've done so much math, I feel like I need to use another example, which is not math. So Montessori has puzzle maps. So the puzzle maps that are used most often in early childhood are continent maps. So you need to imagine the continent map of North America. So there's a piece for Canada, and a piece for the United States, and a piece for Mexico, and then a number of small pieces for all the Central American states, for Honduras and Belize and Nicaragua and Panama and so on. And there is a knob that you can pick up each of these puzzle pieces, just as you would find with any puzzle. But the knob for the United States piece, which is pretty big, it's about the size of my two hands, about that big, is over the far end on the east side, not in the middle of the piece, because the puzzle knob in a puzzle map is at the capital. And a child might build that puzzle 10 times or 20 times or 50 times before he comes to you or to another child and says, why is this puzzle so hard to pick up? It's got the knob here. Why isn't the puzzle here? The piece, the knob in the middle of the piece. And you say, oh, that's because in puzzle maps, the knob to pick it up is always at the capital. Our capital is Washington, D.C. And that's where it is. It's all the way over there. That's another example of indirect aim. Materials on shelves are not at random. They are always arranged in the same way. Here is that way. You start at the upper left-hand corner and move across the shelf and then down to the middle shelf and then down to the bottom. This arrangement left to right is because English is written and read left to right. If you read in a language like Hebrew or Arabic, you would have it the other way around. It would be right to left. Some Asian languages are up and down. So it would start at the top and go here, one, or even over this way, 1, 2, 3 this way, and then 4, 5, 6, and so on. So that's the shelf organization, and we need to move quickly now to room organization. So here you see the opposite of what I described in traditional nursery schools. There's very little extra unnecessary color here. And so things like the whole picture of Montessori or a clock or this beautiful flower arrangement stand out against the neutrals, and also lots of ability to get light in the classroom. Here's another shot. These are both architectural renderings, designs for a school rather than an actual school. Here's an actual school. This one is in a middle-class suburb of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And so you have not only a table for children to work and children's art, but most of the walls being blank, but then these two nice little armchairs that a parent made for the school and books for the children to look at. Here's some more of the same classroom now. Walls mostly bare except for some materials, lots of materials and open shelves that are low, and a low desk for the children to work at. Neat, clean, orderly, efficient, and still attractive to the children. This is an outside lunch area. Sometimes it's cooler outside than inside, and this again is child size. This bar holding this awning is about at my nose height. So this is designed to be appropriate for children, and it's nice and open so the breeze can come through. Here is Montessori 3 to 6 classroom in the United States. This particular one is on the Tulalip Native American Reservation in Washington State, north of Seattle. You can see that there is an open space between all of the shelving where the whole class can gather while the teacher is doing something with the whole class. And then the children can work on the floor or they can work on a table, depending on what they want to do their work at. So there's a variety of things. And there's going to be small tables and large tables in Montessori classrooms. So you can work alone, or with a single person, or with a larger group. So Montessori also talked about the human environment and the limitations, the barriers that humans put in front of children, expecting too much of them, not expecting enough of them, never explaining things, but just demanding that children behave in a way that you haven't shown them what you want them to do. And that's a big part of what you would learn if you took Montessori training. You would learn how to not be a barrier to children's learning. An example of that, of what's different between Montessori and traditional education, is even in how people are arranged in space when we're teaching. When we think of teaching, we think of a teacher at the head of the classroom and all the desks facing the teacher, so that the teacher and the student are facing each other. In Montessori, in this example, this is the primary child who's being given the lesson. This child is sitting in on it, and here is the teacher. So everyone, all three of these people, are facing not the teacher, but the material. The Montessori teacher, another example of what happens in this human environment, Montessori teacher expects children to have internal, intrinsic motivation, that the materials will be interesting to them and that they will be drawn to working on those materials by themselves and with other children. She doesn't give out stickers. She doesn't give out candy. She doesn't give out gold stars. She doesn't give out grades. Certainly not in the preschool classroom. That's another big difference. The child is assumed to be able to concentrate. And one of the jobs of the teacher is to make sure that that concentration is disturbed as little as possible. For example, in Montessori 3 to 6 classroom, there's a long work period. We don't assume that children can only stay focused on something for a few minutes. That period should be at least 2 hours. Many schools have 2.5 or 3 hours in which the child can focus in on one or more materials. So those are some examples of removing the barriers to learning from the way people, the adults in the environment, are behaving. You can see this happening, both the physical environment and the human environment, if you go and observe in Montessori schools, or if you go online to look at video of Montessori schools. But remember that not all Montessori schools are authentic. Thank you very much.